So on the last video, we looked at how there's a story of the people that return, right? That not only do people go to exile like we kind of did in our own exile during lockdown, but that people return. They went back to the land to rebuild their identity, to rebuild their faith, to rebuild their worship to God. And in a similar way, we're looking at this theme of returning as we're going out of our own lockdown, out of our own exile. And we're trying to see some lessons that we can learn as to how to rebuild with incredible conviction, with incredible commitment, and just with a bunch of celebration. So, what we're going to look is we're going to start looking at the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. In the first section of Ezra and Nehemiah is actually the first 6 chapters of this book. And as you read these chapters, you're going to find a lot of really cool stories. You're going to find the stories of people returning. You're going to find stories of people that are so keen to go back and that they're faced with opposition. You're going to find stories that people shrink back and actually do not commit to the work, and that they need other prophets to come and spur them on and encourage them. It's a really cool drama. It's a really cool kind of scene. It's actually really, really encouraging. But as you read, there's a really cool theme that the author of Ezra and Nehemiah wants us to grab. And as we're gonna look for the next few videos, we're gonna try to trace that theme. And when you start reading, you realize that the first thing that they do when they go back to their land, before they even rebuild their temple, before they even rebuild their own homes, they build an altar to God. And that's really important because that shows you where their priorities are. That shows you where their focus and their commitment is at. It's all about worshiping God. And if we want to build our faith again, if we want to rebuild our commitment and our allegiance to King Jesus, we gotta start with worship. The statement is true that you become like what you worship. Whether it's academics or whether it's work, whether it's God and King Jesus, or whether it's popularity and fame, there's something you and I worship. And we're constantly becoming more and more like the very thing that we worship. So when they go back to the land, the very first thing that they decide on is we need to build an altar to God so we can worship Him. I mean, imagine for 70 years in captivity, they didn't get to worship God. They didn't get to go and offer the sacrifice and do all the things that they've done for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's why they're so desperate to rebuild that back. And it makes me think of our lockdown and how I cannot wait for the moment we can all get together and just without a mask, without all these precautions, without hands lifted high and just praising out of my lungs and running out of breath because God is just so good and so awesome and so amazing that I cannot do anything else but worship Him. That's exactly what they do. They rebuild the conviction of worship. Because if we're going to rebuild our identity as the people of God, it has to start with worship. And then as you continue reading, they rebuild the temple, and then they have some opposition, and people don't want them to rebuild the temple, and it gets very dramatic and it's very interesting. But after the whole drama passes, they do this really cool thing, and they celebrate this meal called Passover, which is very interesting. You know, the festival of Passover is a very powerful, very meaningful celebration, very amazing feast that they go through. And Jews to this day celebrate the Passover meal every year. It falls around the same time that we celebrate Easter. And it has a lot of meaning and a lot of really cool symbolism that we can definitely dig in to talk about a little bit more later. But the point is, why is that one of the first things that they do? And why that's the thing that the author of this book wants to highlight. Why, between all the drama of rebuilding, between all the things that you could be wondering as to how it's going on in the rebuilding, why focus on the Passover meal? And here's what I want to say is that I really believe that God created us to live in a certain rhythm, a rhythm that He started all the way in Genesis 1 and that Jesus reintroduces to us when He comes and lives in our world. A rhythm that is in tune and in symphony, acute to His rhythm. And when we try to live on our own rhythm, we feel out of place. We feel tired. We feel exhausted. We feel like something is just not clicking because we're trying to live the symphony of God at our own rhythm, in our own tune. So The Jews understood that they have to go back to the rhythm of God. And the very best way that they knew how to do that was through these feasts and festivals that God instructed them to have throughout the year. He gave them 7 different festivals so that they could celebrate and remember 7 different things about God, about their identity as the people of God, and about the incredible rhythm that it means to live in the rhythm of God. And I think about it for us. You know how awkward it was for the first few weeks to get used to online church? You know how difficult it is to this day to do Zoom Bible studies? It's awkward, it's difficult, and we had to come up with what we have. And I'm praising God that He gave us technology and that we can do these kinds of things. I mean, I'm talking to a camera right now. We're watching this on YouTube, but the point is that it does not compare to seeing somebody face to face. It does not compare to the incredible festivals and convictions that we hold as the people of God. It should never replace meeting together. It should never replace us grabbing bread, taking the juice, and having communion together. It should never replace us gathering and worshiping God. It should never replace the conviction to be zealous and to spread His word. It should never replace all of those rhythms that God has instituted for our lives. Whether it's a quiet time or prayer with a brother or a sister, whether it's singing on the assembly on Sunday, or whether it's just serving others. I don't care what rhythm you choose, but we have to go back to those rhythms. I'm afraid that a lot of us became so comfortable, that a lot of us were so okay with just chilling in our couch, clicking on a video, and that being church. That church became an event instead of becoming a community of people. The church became about what you see and what you hear, and not about who you are and what you do. That can never, ever be the way. And that's what the book of Ezra is trying to teach us. That as you go back to rebuild your devotion, your faith, your allegiance, your identity as the people of God, as we return out of exile, we have to start with worship, and we got to start with rhythms. Rhythms that will help us remember who we are, whose we are, what are we here for, what's our identity, what's our purpose. We need to go back to that. And if we don't have those, we might actually see ourselves losing our faith. We actually might see ourselves just doing activities and not really becoming and being transformed into the character of Jesus. There's many examples that we can talk about. Really many examples. Some people call it spiritual disciplines. Other people call it sacred rhythms. Other people call it whatever. But you know what I'm talking about. It's those things that remind you, I'm a child of God. It's those things that connect you with the incredible presence of God. It's those things that connect you with the people of God, with His family. It's those things that we need to go back to. So as we go back to the return, what are those rhythms? What are those things that you know you have to do, that maybe you and I lost track and we got lazy and comfortable, and we stopped reading our Bibles, we stopped praying, we started meeting together, that we need to go back to today? And more importantly, will you and I build all of this all over again on the incredible conviction of worship? Never forget, you become what you worship. And you're worshiping somebody right now, whether you acknowledge it or not. It better be God. It better be King Jesus, so that we can become more and more like Him.